If you've been dreaming about a place where life feels a little more intentional, discover the Canopy in Sebastopol by City Ventures. This new community offers solar-powered homes, surrounded by mature trees, nature preserves, and walking trails, with a vibrant local downtown, renowned wineries, and the Bay Area all within easy reach. Enjoy low-maintenance living, refined design, and built-in eco-friendly features that make everyday life easier. Start your next chapter at the Canopy by City Ventures. Visit cityventures.com. That's cityventures.com.
There's a camera running in a small room, recording a dying man. He's 67 years old and the throat cancer is well advanced. And everyone in that room, him included, knows there's not much time left. A police officer is sitting by his side. She has come a very long way to ask him just one thing. The same thing the coppers have been asking him for the better part of a quarter of a century. Where is Peter Falconio? The man's eyes are open and his voice, when it comes, is thin and hard. He says he knows nothing. He says he has said the same thing for 22 years. He tells her to stop asking, that he has thought about nothing else the entire time, and that she's only come now, at the very end, because he's dying. I know nothing, he reiterates one last time. 3 weeks later, Bradley John Murdoch is dead. And he has taken whatever he knew, if he knew anything, into the ground with him. And the officer is left hanging on to the question that she came in with. The same question a jury thought it had answered in 2005. The same question this whole country has been unable to file away in the years since. There are two ways to hear a dying man say, "I know nothing." One is that a killer guarded his last and cruelest secret to the final breath. The other is that an innocent man told the same true thing that he'd always told, and no one that counted at least, ever believed him. Welcome back to Struth. I'm your storyteller, Mark, and this is the second of our two-parter covering the disappearance of Peter Falconio. If you haven't listened to part one, you know the drill. Go back and do it now. In that episode, we told you what happened on the Stuart Highway in July of 2001, the way Joanne Lees told it at least, and the way that a court came to find it. A stranger, a gun, a murdered man, a woman who escaped into the darkness. And a drug runner named Bradley Murdoch, convicted on his own DNA by a unanimous jury and sent to prison for the rest of his life. And tonight we're going to look at that story from a different angle. Because a great many people, some of them serious people who really do understand about these things, have never been comfortable with the verdict. There is no body, after all. There are pieces of the account that have never quite fitted together. And of course the man himself denied that he did it, until the day he died. I am not here to tell you that he was innocent. 2 courts, 12 jurors are on the record. I'm not trying to overturn them from my shed here in Tassie. The purpose of this episode is to ask why a case that has been settled like this one has in a court of law has never been allowed to fully rest. Why, even after a seemingly clear-cut verdict, this case is still the most requested that I've ever covered here on Struth. And so I'll attempt to put the doubts and the answers side by side and to let you decide what you think happened. Let's start by being clear about how solid the conviction is. Bradley Murdoch was convicted after a trial in Darwin that ran for 7 weeks in late 2005. The Crown called more than 80 witnesses, and the jury, as we mentioned in part 1, was unanimous. Murdoch appealed to the Northern Territory Court of Criminal Appeal, and he lost. He sought leave to go to the High Court of Australia, and he was refused. And so by every measure our legal system offers, this matter is closed, and it's been closed for 20 years. But the reason that it refuses to sit still is buried in a phrase the trial judge, Chief Justice Brian Martin, would have known better than anyone. The case against Murdoch was almost entirely circumstantial. There was no confession. There was no eyewitness to the killing itself. Even by her own account, Joanne Lees never saw Peter shot, and she never saw his dead body. What the Crown had was a woman's account of a terrifying night, a scattering of physical evidence, and a chain of inference running from one to the other. A circumstantial case can be overwhelming. Juries convict on them all the time, and rightly. But a circumstantial case has a particular weakness, which is that it depends on every link holding, and it invites people forever afterwards to test those links. And for 20 years, people have been testing them. And here is what they have found. Let's start with the largest absence of all, the one that has shadowed this case from the first morning. There is no body. There is also no murder weapon. The Crown's theory was that Peter Falconio was shot in the head with a .22 caliber pistol at close range on the roadside. And yet, at that roadside, police found no bullet, no spent cartridge, and none of the matter that a close-range head wound leaves behind. There was no tissue, no residue from the propellant, nothing of the kind you would expect to find where a man has just been shot dead. They found blood, and it was Peter's blood, on the bitumen. But beyond that, of the killing itself, there was no other trace. And so how do you prove a man was murdered when you can't produce the man, or the weapon, or the bullet, or the body? But the Crown did prove it, to the satisfaction of the jury at least. But let's think about what the defence had to work with. If there's no body, then there's at least a question that you're entitled to ask, and Murdoch's lawyers did ask it, loudly. What if Peter Falconio wasn't dead at all? And this wasn't a theory that they plucked from midair either. In the weeks after the disappearance, witnesses at a roadhouse in Burke, New South Wales, told police that a man they believed was Falconio had stopped and refuelled a vehicle. This was about a week after he supposedly died on a highway 1,000 kilometres away. The defence ran hard with the idea that Peter was still alive, that the whole thing was something other than a murder. The jury didn't believe it though, and neither did Chief Justice Martin. The blood on the road was Peter's, and the state Joanne Lees was found in was not the state of a woman running a hoax. But the roadhouse witnesses said what they said, and they are on the record, and they are one more link that a doubter can take hold of and pull at. And that brings us to Joanne Lees. And here we have to move carefully because this is the exact ground where a nation once got a woman badly wrong. We told you in detail last time about Lindy Chamberlain, about the two edges of that story. That a composed woman is not a liar just because a crowd wants her to weep. And also that a country being wrong about one woman doesn't make it wrong about the next. Both of those are true at once, and both of them press on Joanne Lees. Because when her account was taken into a courtroom and cross-examined, line by line, against the statements she'd given in the hours and days after the attack, elements of her version of events simply didn't line up. She had described being moved from the front cabin of the killer's vehicle through to the rear tray and then escaping out the back. But mechanics who knew Murdoch's four-wheel drive testified that in that model there was no way through from the cabin to the tray at all, and that if the mesh sides of the canopy were secured, the only way out of the back was to break something. On the stand, Lees was asked about it, and she said something quietly devastating to her own account. The police had told her that there was no such vehicle with front to rear access, and that it had put doubt in her own mind. She had, she said, looked at other possibilities, and she no longer knew how she had got from the front of that vehicle to the back of it. But there was more. In her first statement, she had said the killer's headlights were on. By the time of the trial, she thought they must have been off. She also said at trial that she'd been struck on the head, stunned by the blow. But the doctor who examined her the next morning testified that she had never mentioned any blow to the head, and that his statement to police at the time recorded her saying she had not been hit and had not lost consciousness. She also said that she had had a gun held to her head, and yet she felt no heat from it, smelled no gunpowder. And there was also the affair that she had concealed, and the £50,000 she was paid for a television interview, and the fact that she had seen Murdoch's photograph online, captioned as the suspect, a full month before she picked him out of a police photo board. Any one of these has an innocent explanation, and every one of them was given one. A traumatised memory should never be expected to be flawless. People misremember lights and blows to the head, and all sorts of things, especially people who have spent hours face down in the dirt, expecting to die. That's not just a defence of Joanne Lees, it's ordinary human truth. But the questions were asked, and they were fair questions, and they are why the doubt about Joanne Lees has never fully died. And so if the account had understandable wobbles, it was the science that was supposed to be the thing at trial that balanced those wobbles out. And in the end, it was one piece of science that carried almost the entire weight of the case. It was the blood stain on the back of Joanne Lees' t-shirt. A forensic scientist named Carmen Eckhoff told the court that the blood was Murdoch's, and put the figure at least 150 quadrillion times more likely to be his than of anyone else. That might not be a number a jury can wrap its head around, but it's certainly not a number that a jury forgets. Murdoch's answer was that the blood had got there innocently. He and Lees both, separately, had been to a Red Rooster outlet in Alice Springs earlier that day, and he suggested his blood might have been left on a seat or on a door frame, and somehow Joanne, upon her visit, had transferred it onto her shirt. The appeal called that suggestion unreal, and gave a very plain reason. The blood was wet and smudged when it met the fabric of Lee's t-shirt, and Murdoch's own evidence was that he'd been driving for hours, and there was no suggestion that he was bleeding. Wet blood does not wait on a door frame. And so the evidence on the shirt held. But it's important that we look at what happened to the rest of it. As you'll remember, we also mentioned DNA that was said to link Murdoch to the homemade handcuffs that had bound Lees. But the appeal court itself noted a conflict between the experts about how that DNA had been identified, with one describing the technique as pushing science to the limit. There was an awkward fact behind this statement. You see, Northern Territory Police had physically carried Lee's actual handcuffs to South Australia, where Murdoch was in custody as part of an attempt to rattle a confession out of him. The defence argued that the DNA tying him to those cuffs was contamination from that very exercise, and the court agreed that the handcuff evidence was not compelling. It got around the problem by ruling it didn't matter, because the blood on the shirt was enough on its own. And then there is the matter of the man in the truck stop video. The grainy footage of a figure and a vehicle that the Crown said was Murdoch. And to prove it, they called an expert in facial and body mapping who told the jury the man in the video was, categorically, him. On appeal, that evidence was thrown out. The court found that body mapping was not an accepted field of scientific knowledge, that the witness should never have been allowed to stand up and positively identify anyone from this process. A defence expert had said the images were too poor to support any such thing, and this was one of the few grounds of appeal that Murdoch actually won. But again, it changed nothing, because once again the court said the blood on the shirt made the case overwhelming, regardless. Do you see the pattern that the doubters saw? Piece by piece of this circumstantial evidence questioned, weakened, in one case discarded outright by the appeal court itself. And each time the response is the same. It doesn't matter, because of the shirt. The whole conviction, in the end, balances on that single bloodstain. And then there's the man who put the case in motion in the first place. This wasn't a detective. He was a drug dealer, and his name was James Heppy. Heppy was Murdoch's former business partner and had become his bitter rival. When he was arrested on his own drug charges, he offered police the name of the Falconio killer, and the name he provided was Murdoch. He said he had seen Murdoch making cable tie restraints like the ones used on Lee's. He said Murdoch had once described how he would dispose of a body. It was Heppy's tip that turned the whole investigation toward Murdoch in the first place. But Heppy was a first-time informant with everything to gain. There was a $250,000 reward on offer, and he himself, facing serious drug trafficking charges, walked away with a largely suspended sentence, the judge noting his cooperation with police. His two most damning claims, the cable ties and the body disposal talk, could never be independently verified. And the cable tie claim was fouled from the start, because months earlier the police had shown replica handcuffs to the media, complete with a description of how they were made, so anyone at all could have known exactly what they looked like. There were details that didn't match either. Acquaintances said Murdoch had neither the moustache nor the long hair that Lee's described at the relevant time. He'd also bought a trailer that neither Lee's nor the truck stop camera ever saw. His dog was a Dalmatian named Jack, and Lee's had described a different animal altogether. Of all of the dogs on the planet, a Dalmatian kind of stands out. It's also important to note that Murdoch ran cannabis from South Australia across to Broome in the west along the Tanami track. And so why, on the night in question, was he 300 kilometres north of the Tanami turnoff, past Barrow Creek, in the wrong direction entirely? He always maintained that he was somewhere else, well along that western track at the time Peter Falconio was shot. And underneath all of it lay Murdoch's own explanation for everything, which he never once abandoned. He said quite clearly that he was being framed. He said the drug rival, Heppy, or the police, or both, had built a case against an innocent man. And it is worth knowing that shortly before the Falconio investigators reached him, Murdoch had been arrested in South Australia on charges of rape and abduction, and that a jury there acquitted him of all of them. Murdoch always maintained that those charges had been engineered to get hold of his DNA. Whatever the truth of that, his acquittal sat comfortably beside his other claim, the one about the highway, that he was a man being fitted up for something he did not do. And that, dear listeners, is the case for the doubt over Murdoch's conviction. And it's more than nothing. And the other question that no amount of legal argument has ever answered. If Bradley Murdoch did kill Peter Falconio, then where on earth did he put him? 25 years on and no one knows. Police have mounted serious searches at least 6 times. They've covered ground near Barrow Creek more than once, and they've never found so much as a bone. There are people still who believe that they can find him. But they start with the assumption of Murdoch's guilt, and they only ask where a guilty Murdoch would have gone. A British geoforensic specialist, Dr. Mark Harrison, who advised on the original searches, believes that the answer is close. He points to a disused racecourse only 8 kilometres from the attack site. In his line of work there is a rule, he said. Clear the ground from under your feet. Look first at the nearest place a body could be hidden, and with regards to Barrow Creek, the nearest such place is that racecourse. It was walked over in the days after the killing, but he says it was never searched the way a crime scene is searched, and that the site has barely changed in a quarter of a century, frozen, in his words, just waiting. A former FBI profiler who worked the case with him, Kathy Canning-Mallow, argues the racecourse is likely, but adds a second candidate, a disused pit off the Tanami track, the drug road Murdoch knew intimately, a place he could have driven past 100 times, knowing no one would ever look there. And an Australian search expert, Jim Whitehead, who spent a career finding the missing, disagrees with both. His work points east, perhaps 70 kilometres from the crime scene. He thinks Peter was not buried at all, but simply concealed, covered with whatever was to hand in one of the mounds of dirt that graders leave along the outback roads. 3 experts, 3 answers, and no real way to choose between them. And so we have now spent an entire episode pulling on every loose thread we could find, because that's the honest thing to do with a case that people just can't let go of. But now, before we finish, I feel like I owe you the other side of the ledger, told just as squarely. Because the people closest to this case do not have any doubts. Quite the opposite. Let's start with the judge. When Chief Justice Brian Martin sentenced Murdoch, he did not just convict him of murder. He addressed directly what Murdoch's defence had done to Joanne Lees. Murdoch's team had tried, the judge said, to cast a shadow over her, to suggest to the jury not only that she was unreliable, but that she was lying about the whole disappearance, that she was somehow herself implicated. And the judge answered that in words that leave nothing hanging. By their verdicts, he said, the jury rejected those assertions and suggestions. And then, of himself, he offered 5 plain words. I too reject those suggestions. And then let's take Joanne Lees herself, and the moment that, for a lot of people who followed this trial, settled it. Her whole account had been attacked on the point of how a woman with her hands bound behind her back could possibly have got free and flagged down a truck. And so the Chief Justice gave her the chance to show everyone. And in open court, her hands were tied behind her back, and without a moment's hesitation, in front of the jury and the judge and the public gallery, she put her bound arms down and under her feet and brought them up to the front of her body, exactly as she had always said she did, alone in the dark, 20 years before. A law professor named Andrew Hemming later studied this case for a book about contested convictions, and he was asked whether there was any chance Bradley Murdoch was innocent. His answer was one word: none. The idea that Joanne Lees was part of some insurance plot he called fantastical, given the injuries she carried and the state the truck drivers found her in. He watched her step through her own bound arms in that courtroom, and what he took from it was not suspicion. She is, he said, a very brave woman, and she has been given far less credit than she deserves. And Colleen Gwynn, the detective who led the hunt, who knows the evidence in this case better than almost anyone alive, who's heard every version of doubt that we provided you today. She understands, she says, why a missing body makes people uneasy about a verdict. No body, no crime, as the old saying goes. But against it, she sets what she calls a mountain of forensic evidence, and one fact that tends to get lost in the arguments. When Bradley Murdoch was finally caught, he still had Joanne Lee's belongings in his possession. To anyone who remains, in her word, not a believer, Gwynn has a standing invitation. Read the transcripts, and if you still have doubts after that, she says, come and talk to me. So, two courts, a Chief Justice, the lead investigator, and an independent scholar, all certain, a conviction that has survived every appeal this country could throw at it. A single blood stain that no innocent explanation has ever dislodged. But still, no body, no weapon, no grave for Joan and Luciano Falconio to stand beside. A dying man in a hospital bed saying, I know nothing. And out at the Barrow Creek pub, pinned to the wall behind the bar, a single $5 note that Peter Falconio left there the day before he died, still waiting for him to come back and collect. The jury was sure. The judge was sure. The detective is sure. And you've heard why they're sure. And you've heard why some people still are not. So what do you believe? What happened to Peter Falconio? Let me know in the comments. Because after all of this, after 2 parts, to be honest, I'm none the wiser. I've been your storyteller, Mark, and this has been another episode of Struth. Thanks again to everyone who requested this. And a big thanks to everyone over the past couple of weeks who shared the show with a mate, who's liked it, subscribed, put a comment in on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you're listening to it. It makes a huge difference and I really appreciate it. If you want even more Struth, come and check us out on Patreon or on Apple subscriptions. There's a bonus episode each week. We're up over 20 now. And you also receive 1 week early, ad-free copies of our regular content. I'll put links in the show notes if you want to check that out. But until next week, when I'll see you with another Australian mystery, look after yourself. Hooroo.